nice. Oh, got it.
Being recorded. I have an option to leave the meeting then. Okay, so here's the thing, and this is Jeff and I go way back. We've worked together for a long time, on and off. And I believe, and I've always believed about this industry, is that it is fantastic. It gives us, as creative people, we have a platform to actually express ourselves and come up with ideas, have opinions, and people pay us for those opinions, which is pretty cool. There's a lot of worse jobs out there. So that's I think we're in a chaotic time. We can unpack that a little bit more, but I think there's a lot of good to be had in this industry. Jeff?
Okay, so I would counter it with, I'm aware that the industry has changed considerably since I got into it about 25 years ago, when the output was mostly radio commercials, TV commercials, billboards, which were manageable projects. And now we've moved into like a digital sphere and social, and it's all been fragmented quite a bit. But it seems that we were able to solve problems, creative problems, with smaller teams and relatively a more healthy work-life balance, where you actually saw more output in relative to how much time you were putting into making this work. And so I've been freelancing for the last 10 years at agencies all across the country, and I see a culture of it's normal to work till 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock, weekends, all the time, emails all the time. And I would say, if we were doing incredible work that was impactful, I'd say, okay, that's the sacrifice you make for that stuff. But most of the creative people I speak to, and my own experiences have been, the work is really not that inspiring, what the output is from all this time put in. So where did it go? How did it get to this place, which was the original question, where people seem, it's hard for me to make a case to young people when they say, hey, should I go into advertising? To tell them what I feel like that culture looks like now and feels like now.
Of course. But like a couple of things you commented on, Jeff, which are, I think you find across a lot of people who have been in this industry a long time, they pine for the past. They think backwards and they go, wow, what a great time that was. Wasn't that great? Well, you know what? There's a lot of shit about it that wasn't that great. I still worked incredibly late hours, missed a lot of events for my kids, and I'm not proud of that. But it's like, that's what you put in to get to great work. That's what we were told you had to put in to get to great work. Now, as a creative industry, it is up to us now to reimagine what the industry can create and make and do. We're one of the few, we're probably the only creatively driven kind of business that has not kept up with, the changes of the internet and the world of digital,
Well, you said it right there. If that is the sacrifice you make, and I agree with you, to make great work, great anything, great comedy, great advertising, great music, it doesn't happen on a 9 to 5. And I appreciate those who commit themselves to making that work, not just on the creative side, but the account side, production side. But I think, and it's subjective what great is, but I think I think a lot of people would agree that the things that they're staying late at night for are not these career building experiences that maybe you and I had. This is because the only way the agencies can really make money is to make most people really work 2 or 3 salaried hour jobs for the price of 1. And that's why everything is just kind of rush, do it yesterday. So you're not even really giving the client or the work your best self anyway, because you haven't even time to really think about something. And yet you're working all the time. And at the end of the year, you look at what you made. And for most people, I would say it doesn't stack up against tucking in your kids at night. Whereas, and that's subjective. What is great work? Some could argue nothing that's advertising could ever be great. But I think there was great craft in what we were doing. And I understand the world's moved on. An Instagram post might not need to be shot by, the best director in the country over a 5-day shoot. But you get what I'm getting at. We were involving ourselves in making something that had creative merits.
Sure. Like the craft of advertising was at one time was a disruptive art force, and I think that was pretty cool when you were in that place, that the stuff you did, people always saw because there was a very fine or a finely defined output. But, there's, like, I think a lot of the issues you're talking about are also systemic to like what they call like creative agencies, right? The big agencies that are trying to figure out how do we continue to get paid the same way we've always been getting paid, and yet have a product to output while their share keeps shrinking. So there's an incredible amount of chaos within a lot of those walls.
Yeah, and we talked about this before about maybe some of this is an overemployment problem. I've been in rooms of 13, 14, 15 people. And I'm like, okay, you would think that what we're putting out there is like a real solution to a world problem. There's 14 well-paid people in this room to make nothing stuff, to make, there's really no need for that many people and there's just no need. And I would argue that if you had fewer people on the staff, then people might have more breathing. They wouldn't be working to solve 2 or 3 or 4 creative problems a day or a week, when in the time that and great, I get it. I don't want to sound like an old guy and be like, I remember when, but you just can't make anything that good that fast. And I understand that there's some things that have to be ephemeral, like social media posts. But if that's going to be the bar, I don't see the reason for kids to be giving up so much money to go to ad school and so many hours in their 20s and 30s of their adult life to make this stuff. I'm wondering why there isn't more humane boundaries put around the work.
Sure. There's also, I think we're at an incredibly heightened level of chaos that I think we need to figure out how to work our way through. The agency world that you and I grew up in is gone. It's completely gone, right? Yet there are still elements of people trying to hold on to them. But the faster we let go of that and say, okay, the ad agency model based on this idea of just like, billing by hour, putting things that are, like the definition of a creative as an art director and a writer, putting them, get redundancies, versions of them and put them around a problem and have them come up with a mood board that we sell an idea to a client and then we go out and make it. Just has to change. It just has to change. And we're in the process of changing it, right? But we're still in an interesting place of like, wow, what a cool place to share ideas and work on brands.
What you're saying, I love the sentiment of it. It just doesn't match the experience that I've been having. Or that my friends, when I hear them talk about everything from the architecture to the accounting, seems to be set up in these buildings against idea generation. These big open rooms, I get that it helps the bottom line. It doesn't make better work because it's these big monstrous rooms where everyone just puts on headphones and there's no space physically or with time to think. And then when you go down to the accounting, like you said, you have to bill by the hour. So it's not really about, like you said, it's about just selling time. And so if you're selling time, if that's really your output, not a proprietary creative process or even proprietary talent, most of the talent that's winning these pitches or doing the work are freelancers. So what are you selling except someone who came on board to be a salaried employee who's going to work, like I said, 3 jobs for the price of 1? That's why I think I can't believe that there are so many agencies still left. And there are new forms of agencies, and I've been lucky enough to work with some of them, new models. That's great. But for the most of the industry, could you really look at a young person and tell them to go to Miami Ad School?
Well, I don't know if Miami Ad School is the answer, but you've enjoyed yourself at some of these other companies, right? These smaller, nimbler, and they're asking you to work fairly quickly, and it seems to work, right?
It works, and maybe I don't want to toot my own horn, but I've been doing this for 25 years, so I can solve a problem fairly quickly, and so that does work. I mean, I've just been flexing that muscle for a longer period of time. Where are the younger people supposed to get that experience to do that if they're being trained by people who have been elevated to creative director positions, who haven't even had the time to develop work themselves or even learn how to mentor a group?
I think you're right. And I think that's chaotic and dreadful. But I also think there's an evolution of these ideas of what's a writer or what's an art director. I believe the evolution of the title of art director needs to be more of a maker, more of a, someone who understands motion and, can be a motion artist on Maya, can really put their ideas forward that, can actually get put out into the world immediately and not just, give you an idea of what something might look like in a Photoshop file
Right.
until
But
you
now you're kind of
talking. Yeah.
Sounds like you're talking about a production company, right? And
well, sure, absolutely.
This isn't just semantics. You have to ask I would think you've asked yourself, what room is there in the future for an ad agency structure, whether it's traditional or not? Why not just go to a place where you can make stuff?
Absolutely. You mean the way that a model is built right now? I think there's very little space in it. I think you'll see in a couple of years, it'll just drastically will hit a tipping point, and there'll just be fewer of them. I think and you even look at like holding companies trying to invest in smaller, interesting, different ideas. You look at something like S4, who've put production right at the center of their company and their model, and then built
Human out as well. Human out here in Chattanooga. Yeah,
that's right. Put content at the center. We're going to be concepting on the stage where we're going to make it. We have a round table, a little more writer's room style. And we're not going to go off and, put my feet up and come in at 11 with a bowl of cereal and bitch and moan about leaving at 6 or 8 or whatever, and come up with a couple ideas or scripts,
So why do you think so many people still go? I mean, I see so many people who seem to be suffering from like a version of Stockholm syndrome. They seem to all hate their jobs and they don't leave them,
Yeah. Or they don't look at how to reinvent them. I think it's how to, we can more times than ever now that you can actually think of something, shoot it, create it, post it, and be done. Like we can create our own work at home on my phone. It doesn't, why aren't more people doing that?
I don't mean to be glib. I don't mean that anyone could just go quit their job. I just meant like, even during the pandemic, I'm trying not to name names here. Like there were major agencies that were, I think were really driving a workflow that was abusive over Zoom to people who were like also trying to raise their kids at home and, and do all this stuff for work that inevitably was never going to happen. Like just so much of the work just doesn't go anywhere. And it just seems to be a hard sell to young people to go into the business, like I was saying. But I'm just surprised that more creatives haven't banded together. I don't want to say in a union, but like, there's a culture that does not allow you to stick up. It's hard for you to advocate for yourself in this business, to say, I'm going to go home. I'm just going to go home, or I'm not going to answer an email at 10 o'clock at night over something that is really not that important.
So let me ask you guys a question real quick, because I'm hearing you say a lot about young people coming in the industry. And we were talking a little bit about George Tannenbaum last night and aging and ageism. And so what now is the reason also to stay in the industry? You have a huge influx because of all of these people who are leaving and becoming freelancers rather than going full time, or who are finding something else to do because of this input versus output and this work-life balance, and in the Zoom age that we're living in, being in this constant state of emergency and also having to constantly be responding to emails at 9, 10 o'clock at night, because now you're working at home. So you're always available.
Yeah, look, what I don't want to have happen is having a certain idea of what advertising is, which is an ad agency, be the defining or be the definition of what advertising is. That was the one door that I was allowed to go through to get into the industry, right? And there were a few in-house agencies that you would never go to, but you wanted to get a job at an ad agency. Now you can work at all these in-house agencies that are really, really good. If you're into sports, you can go work at Barstool. If you're into music, you can work at Spotify. Like, I just think we have to open the aperture. And just because one door is dented and not working well, we can't let that define what an experience of advertising is.
That's certainly I think we're in agreement there. No debate there. I guess maybe it is strange to me that an industry that is worth to try to help other industries and companies rebrand and reassert themselves in the culture, that the industry hasn't been able to do it for itself. You know?
I absolutely agree with you, Jeff. Like, think about this. Advertising became so good at storytelling, right? They actually believe their own story about innovation and transformation, right? So think about this. Here's an ad agency saying, we're going to become a creative transformation company and we're going to transform brand X, your brand. But yet, if you look internally at like a traditional ad agency model, you know, they haven't transformed that since 1960, right? So they're selling this story, yet they don't transform themselves. They don't know how to show up differently or how to surround a problem differently. And, you know, it just gives advertising a bad name. So I agree with you that, yeah, people should not go to certain agencies. I'm not going to name them. And then, you know, how do we, but I think there's so many wonderful, fun, interesting, cool opportunities to just, you know, create fun work.
So let me ask you, how do you, whether it be at Wunderman or other agencies, how do agencies form a sense of culture or reason for being when so much of the staff that is directly hands-on on the output is freelance? How do you, if you don't have a stable of talent, what is the agency selling?
Yeah, I mean, look, they have to. They're all responsible for their own story, you know. But I agree with that. They need to come up with what that is. You know, I think there's a very funny article that, like, you know, what was it when it was a kind of like an Onion-esque article that, you know, freelance team beats out other freelance team in a new business pitch. You know.
Oh yeah.
But it's true. Yeah, it's because, you know, every agency is running so lean. So they go, oh, we're going to freelance this, and then you use that to kind of do it. And then the clients go, all right, so, you know, who's my, you know, what's my team going to be? And I agree. That's the chaos of it right now. There's the overreaching of business, and then, you know, how do you figure out, and then figuring it out afterwards.
And it's on both sides too. I mean, when most of your creative team is freelance and your client relationships are project based, there really isn't any really long relationships on either end of the equation. The people making it don't really get to know each other and get a rhythm with each other, nor do you get that with the client. So I feel like it's a disservice to a lot of the work. And it is going to make more clients and more creative people go to places like Uber and Spotify and maybe even media companies like Buzzfeed.
That's a pretty close to an AOR, right? Because you're working on one brand over and over again, building that consistency, building that rhythm. I think it's a really interesting kind of job. Now, you do just work on one brand, but you're representing that brand. Yeah, I think that's another piece of the model that's in chaos and has, you know, is pretty busted, is that the traditional agency model is structured on AORs, and it really has to figure out quickly to survive. How do you do project work? How do you do this? How do you spin up a team and then at the same time also spin down a team when you're done with it? You know, when you brought up production companies before, that figured, like, when we would go shoot a spot, they would be spinning up a group to help us go shoot that spot. There'd be a line producer, there'd be a first AD, they'd be putting the crafts, everything to craft service being put together for that project. So we're going to have to do the same thing, you know?
Do you, let me ask you, like, you know, I was a CCO for like 5 minutes, and you've been a CCO for a bit. And we both know other CCOs who want to affect the culture. Is it possible for a big agency, the established ones, to pivot and change other?
Yeah, it's super hard. It's super hard. And I've tried a couple, right? So I've tried Saatchi. And the tricky thing about Saatchi, I mean, after RGA had a very specific thing they were selling. It was innovation, right? And we can argue whether it was or it wasn't, but they had a product to sell. The interesting thing about something like Saatchi is that, yes, the effort, the vision, the thought process was, we are going to become a more modern advertising company, right? But the better they did at what they were known for, big Super Bowl commercials, the Tide ad, Olay, all sorts of those things, they further cemented the thing they were trying to get away from or expand, right? So then clients would surround those, you know, your scope starts to shrink a little bit. The clients surround those scopes with social agencies and in-house talent. the interesting thing about something like Wunderman Thompson is that it's a collision of many different diverse thinkers, from tech to rich data to people who build apps to people who in commerce, like people who really know how to do this stuff, not just talk about it in meetings. And then you mix in storytelling from JWT. The chaos in that case is, how do you connect these people? Mm-hmm. And there's vision is one thing, it's implementation something else, right? So, you know, it's a really interesting time I think it's really fascinating to bring together all these diverse backgrounds, diverse skill sets at the intersection of all their thinking to go like, wow, that's a really interesting solution you just had. And it's not necessarily a script, and it's not following this this idea that a big idea is a narrative commercial. And that's kind of refreshing, you know. Now how we package it and bring it together and sell it to a client, you know, takes some other people to help do that. Mm. But, you know, it's exciting to work with a really creative data scientist who's talking about data in a interesting way. And I'm like, well, all right, that's cool.
You know, tell me if you've experienced this, Taras, where you're not going to throw your own agency under the bus, but like I've seen a lot of people who hold the title of creative director or even higher up, who really, they don't have the experience they're out of their depth, you know, and they're the ones mentoring younger people. So when I came into the business, granted, it was a billion years ago, but there were people who I could really learn how to become a better writer, even better design, better presenter. I was able to watch people who were really good at what they were doing. But one of the side effects of having a staff that's freelance is there isn't any kind of intellectual property shared amongst the people at the agency. So the people who are really good at something come in and they do it, and maybe they present or they sell it or they strategize it, and then they dip out. And there's no one left to retain that information and share it.
Yeah, look, you're kind of right. You know, the tricky thing about having like a freelance creative director or a freelance ECD is that one of the biggest things you need to learn as a CD or an ECD or CCO is that you have to get really jazzed and excited when someone else cracks it, you know, and you're supporting that person and you're bringing them along, like you're saying. Now, if your person's freelancing, they're thinking about, how am I going to sell this spot? How am I going to make this thing? And sure, you make that day rate, so we'll call you a CD or whatever it is, yeah. You know. And then the system puts them in charge of some other people to look at work, and it's just a mess. I absolutely agree with you on that. It's just not a healthy system. But that's every industry. You know, there's a lot of industries that are just, you know, don't structure themselves the right way.
Yeah, that's what I'm scared about, having been through one industry. I'm like, if other industries are like this, from the pilots to my doctors, then you have to really wonder, are there only a few pilots who really know what they're doing?
Well, someone's graduating last in the class, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Even if, you know.
So we agree more than we disagree.
You know, look, I know that we disagree on the fact that this industry is doomed. I think this industry is in a really kind of really kind of bubbling with energy around different platforms and places to come up with ideas and put them. People just haven't gotten really good at it. Think about when you and I get in this industry, we became really great at the technology of television. And we say, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to master that technology. We're going to understand editing and lensing, and we're going to understand film grading. We're going to understand music and mixing and all this stuff to create a very emotional, moving TV commercial. I don't think creatives have done enough work to master the technologies that are currently in front of us, right? Mobile, you know, even just things, you know, different social media platforms, you know. We become lazy with the idea of like, well, here's these best practices, and then we follow those best practices, and it's just horseshit, because our job is to bend those best practices.
Well, but, you know, storytelling is storytelling, whether you do it in 4 seconds on TikTok or 4 hours on Netflix. There's some storytelling basics that you should kind of.
But it's not all storytelling. So it's, the big idea might not be a story. And I think there's such a strong muscle still in the industry that the big idea is going to have a manifesto with a beginning, middle, and end, and make you kind of move you to feel something. It's like, well, why is that the big idea? Yeah. So I think that's, but agencies in general, most of them don't know how to sell it or how to build it, or
that's the final
how to pay for it.
Yeah, and that's the last mile. If there's no one there to sell any of the stuff in the end, and I felt that the more daring things were able to be sold when there was a relationship as the foundation of the transaction. How do you get someone to do something risky or interesting or surprising or remarkable if there isn't trust? And how can you have trust with a relationship? And in an industry that has moved away from AOR to more projects and staff that don't trust each other because they're not on staff with each other, it's amazing that anything remarkable gets produced at all.
I would say it's an industry in its infancy again, which is kind of cool, but it's also chaotic, and there's going to be a lot of mistakes because there's even account people who don't understand how to talk to a client, who doesn't understand what to buy, who's bonused a certain way based on how an ad might get tested still. There's so many pieces that are just kind of not even broken, but just don't exist.
So I can't convince you to quit.
How can I quit? How can I quit? It's too much fun, Jeff. Come on. I can't convince you to go deeper. Think broader, come up with new things and new places. You do with your art. All of your stuff is, beautiful and moving and, gets a lot of attention.
Yeah, well, I thought that was, you were able to do that in the ad world.
Do it in the ad world. Do it like you did it for Kimmel. That was cool.
That was fun. So, and let me ask you, you mentioned account people before, and I used to be one a long time ago, and I don't really have access into what's going on the account side of these agencies or production companies. But, why do you think we live in a culture of everything being an emergency when some of this work isn't slated to run until 2022? How did that culture take hold? And do you think there's anything we can do to stop it? Is there anything you could do at Wunderman if that exists there to stop it?
Sure. I have a lot of those conversations, and I think it's, it is my job is to change that, right? My job is to say, why do we need to do this tomorrow? Oh yeah, well, no, we don't have to. We can do it on Thursday.
Because it's the service industry.
Yeah. It's like, come on, let's just at least give this some thought. Unfortunately, people just, too many people like myself in a place of responsibility are kind of saying yes to calendars that are built by a young project manager who puts a calendar together and just gets put into the system, and then people are like, oh, I guess I got to show stuff on Wednesday. It's Tuesday afternoon. So it's like, and then it's unfair on people like you who really don't have any power to say no, and I understand that, and that's not fair. So
that goes back to the mentoring. Like, why is a 23-year-old production? I mean, not that 23 excludes you from being intelligent and having experience, but I mean, come on.
But yeah, and then you look at the reporting structures. You have to change reporting structures, right? So project managers generally report to finance. Okay, so something you have to figure out then is like, okay, so how do we not just incentivize them to just be thinking of financially about hours and keeping people's time busy? So you develop some things like, okay, maybe there's like some jobs like creative operations, and you find some people who are working with the project managers to also help understand, well, what are people good at and how they should show up. And maybe that person takes a little bit longer. Maybe they should work on that project instead of this project, right? Human beings, thinking about them as, how they should, how we should work together rather than just as numbers.
And I think there's too many, you don't think there's too many people in these agencies? We got to get rid of some of these people.
Yes,
come on.
I do. I can't say that though. I can't say there's too many people.
When I was at Frankfurt Balkan, there was 50 people in that building, and they were making websites, and they were making annual reports, and they were making print ads, and there were lots of moving pieces, maybe not as sexy to even getting a print catalog out, a print annual report. Granted, it wasn't TikTok and it wasn't, social media posts, but there was a lot of things moving in lots of different mediums, and 50 people were able to solve those problems. And I walk into buildings with 2,000 people, and I'm like, it seems like they're just making problems, like just to solve them.
Yeah, well, I mean, look at there's that collision of like the way a company or an agency is structured and like organized, and then working on and creating for platforms that things like TikTok or Snap or where there's like a 12-year-old who just made 12 of those videos that you just did a briefing on.
Well,
so
I've lost a lot. I mean, listen, everyone's a case study of one, but I've lost a lot of work in just not submitting to ridiculous timelines. Because if you say no, there's someone right behind you in this economy willing to do it right away. And thank God I don't, have anyone else financially that I'm responsible for, so I can make some of these decisions unilaterally. But folks, they're put in a very tenuous position here where, if you say no to anything like this, you might not work again for a while with that agency. So you kind of just keep going and going. And that's one of the downsides of being a freelancer, is that,
Sure.
Your next job is really
Absolutely.
dependent on how much of a team player you are. And I would say that being a team player doesn't always lead to the best ideas or the best structure of a calendar.
Yeah, look, you're not participating as a freelancer for that freedom of deciding to not do it tomorrow. You're not participating in the culture, the creation of the direction the company goes. And I would imagine there's a freedom to just go like, all right, well, here's some ideas. That's what I have. What else do you want? It's like, that's it. That's the end of that spigot of.
I mean, this example has happened more often than not. You submit work to an agency in chaos. I'm on the outside as a freelancer and I'm throwing it over the wall, especially during COVID. And then, the feedback comes at 7:00 at night. And that feedback needs to be addressed for a meeting that they've just scheduled at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Something like that has happened more often than not. And that's just not a way to great work. So now, you talk about the freedom. There isn't a lot of freedom if you've negotiated a day rate and you're not going to get paid for those hours at night. You're not going to get paid for a second day. Now, everyone can negotiate their own ways, or I get it, but during quarantine, I did a project where I tried to listen to what people needed help with, and I would try to offer some kind of help. And this was overwhelmingly the feedback that people were having, experiencing, whether they were full-time or freelance. There was just really no space to advocate for themselves, push back and say no, for fear of losing their work/health insurance. And it just seems like a very toxic environment. And that's why it's hard for me to tell young people to stay in the business. And I try to get people who are middle-aged out,
Well, getting people out of the industry.
I
love that. But it's just finding a place that works for you, right? And a lot of those situations, you're absolutely right. They sound toxic, they sound horrible, and you shouldn't work there. But there's a lot of ones that aren't like that.
There are, and they tend to be the smaller ones, which goes back to what you were saying in the beginning. They are the more the ones that have pivoted, but they didn't really pivot because they weren't big to begin with. They kind of were born out of a response to the Saatchis and the Publicises and the mechanics.
But think about this: there's two levels trying to figure something out. Some are just broken, and the chaos is like, wow, we don't even know what's happening here, and we're panicked and we're going to lose, so we're acting out of a state of fear, right? You've worked at those, it sounds like. There's also but there's also those that I know you've worked at, and like a young RGA, right? Mm-hmm. That has ambitions to do something else. They're just not good at it yet. Okay, so remember those times. I mean, there's a lot of kind of chaos of trying to figure that out and going through it. We were at least surrounded by some people of just craft that we knew it would at least look good. But so I think there's that range of chaos right now. And even the small agencies, there's an element of chaos of like, how do we move faster and change the industry the way we want it to be? And we have a point of view. But it's just such a heightened level of it that, we have to figure out as creatives, how, where do we fit in best? And then how do we stay curious? How do we not just sit there and go, well, this is the way advertising is, or, it's like, well, let's try something else in different places and, go sideways for a little while and see where that takes us. You're not
All
going
right.
to get me to
I'll go sideways.
So I'm gonna we're gonna start moving to, if you have any questions that you want to ask the guys, just write in the chat off to the side, like raise your hand and I will unmute you. And I think I'll start off with a question while we wait and see who's got something to ask. And one of the things that a lot of my full-time friends, I've been freelance throughout most of the pandemic. And because of that, people don't want to pay me to work overtime. So the only time I'm working overtime is if they want to give me extra money, which I'm generally happy about, or I'm taking on several gigs at once. A lot of my friends felt like there was not a boundary necessarily between when, you know, a 9 to 5 or like when they should work or not. And so they felt like they were constantly overwhelmed, but they don't really want to go back into the office. So what I'm starting to wonder is, you know, do we think that because of the outcome of the pandemic, most places are going to be going hybrid? Is this something that helped the industry or did it hurt the industry? Like, is it helping or hurting culture? Is it helping and hurting ideas? Is it still the same and none of it has really changed? We're just online and perhaps drinking by ourselves instead of at the bar.
Why not? Well, look, I think the pandemic is there's as horrific as it is. It is a great accelerant, and it's an accelerant for a lot of things. But I think specifically in this case, the idea of what is an agency, where do I work, where do I go, and you see people with the hands on the wheel, they're to go a little batshit crazy. Like, you know, there's these things of like, well, you must be back in the office on November 1st. And, you know, we're going to, that's what collaboration is being together. It's like, really? Is that what collaboration is? And Jeff, it's going to change the makeup of what an office is, you know?
Yeah, I think it's all actually good. I mean, like you said, it's horrific that we are still going through it and gone through it. Or, I mean, it's not, in Tennessee, the pandemic wasn't real, so I don't really have a sense of what you're talking about. But I think in the end, it'll be very good because I think it's given everyone some time to reflect. Whether they've made use of that time or not is up to them. But what do you really want for yourself? What do you want for the type of boss you want to be, the type of employee you want to be, the type of coworker you want to be? Do you even want to be in this job? And how much of it can you have back on your own terms? What?
Well, sure. And look, Jess, I think the idea of just, you know, what lights you up, what gets you excited about, what are you passionate about, and how do you follow that? And it very well might not be in an ad agency, but it very well might be a very creative, using all your creative powers to help a product or brand that you really love. And that's another form of what this industry is going to become more of.
Well, I've always said one of the best things about the industry is the people you meet, because you can meet so many talented people from all different, you know, crafts, you know, music, editing, you know, actors, directors, you know, tech people. So it's really, it is a good place to pick up talented friends to collaborate with. Somebody asked thoughts on ageism in the industry. I mean, you know, like we were talking about before, this is an industry that has sold the idea of perpetual youth to generations. So, I mean, it's really hard to look in the mirror and be like, but you know, I know that George has talked about this, and I've touched on it a little bit here. I think that when you push people out because they might not be like your target audience, you also throw the baby out with the bathwater. You throw away all the opposite of the baby. You throw away all the experience and the knowledge. So I think there's a big knowledge and experience vacuum in this industry, and you know, it's easy to laugh at someone old who doesn't get TikTok. Like I worked at Facebook and I've never had TikTok on my phone. I'd probably be confused if I used it, but I still have a lot to offer in terms of how to get a project from beginning to end. You know, those things are there's always going to be an obstacle to every project. I've learned after doing 100 projects how to move around those obstacles. Someone who's new might be stymied by those obstacles and just end a project. So thoughts on ageism. I wish, you know, I'd tell you this. the last 4 years, I've been doing something pretty unusual. I've been partnering with, he was a stand-up comedian, and I begrudgingly brought him into the ad world as I mentored him as a writer. And we partner frequently when we take freelance gigs. And, you know, I'm 51 and he was 24. He just turned 25. You don't usually get that in this business where you get to team. You usually team by art director, writer, or if you're just friends. And most people are friends with people their own age. It would be really interesting to see some cross-generational pairings because I really do learn a lot from him. And I know he's learned a lot from me. So I wish.
Yeah, look, ageism is horrible, right? And I think we're all going to experience it at some point because that's just the way, you know, it's just one of those prejudices that's horrible. But the industry is not able to sustain itself. So it's not going to be able to sustain people who reach a certain stage of their career who are making a certain salary.
How much? How much is that? How much is that per day? When do we have to? What's the cutoff, Taras?
Yeah.
How much?
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
But what happens is that well, you said the tall blades of grass get cut because they go, well, we'll just do it with younger people who don't know as much. But you're right, they lose all of that knowledge, the craft, the knowledge of craft. And then the craft is just not as good.
Also, as you get older, as maybe Dave will attest to, and how old are you, Taras? Can you say? Is that legal to ask you?
I'm about to turn 55.
Wow. When you get older, you learn just to tell people to shut the fuck up. You just learn to not take people's shit anymore. And when you're in your 30s, it's all about eating shit. So there are somebody in the room who's going to be like, enough of this conversation. We're moving on.
Yeah, but there are repercussions to that as well, as you found out. So
I know. Somebody asked, Joseph asked, not somebody, he's got a name, if there are any tips on pivoting from freelance to a permanent gig. Well, I would say take an attitude like mine. Most people are really going to hire me and bring me on and just be an enjoyable person. No, tips from pivoting from freelance to a permanent gig. I mean, tips. I mean, the tips would be obviously have your portfolio as up to date as possible. And I'd have to ask you why you want to go from freelance to permanent, because that might help. And
I think just to add to that before you even answer that, Joseph, is what do you like to do? Like, what are your passions? And I wouldn't just take a permanent gig for the fact of a permanent gig, but the opportunities are so broad that, like I said before, you know, you could work at, you know, we have a good friend, you know, Paul Derry, who's at Yeti, who just, you know, there's a lot of outdoor cool video production craft stuff they're doing. It looks beautiful, beautiful work. These brands have figured it out. So if you're, you know, if it's not just the gig of advertising, but it's like, what lights you up? Where do you want to work? What do you want to work on?
Supposedly I'm looking at the chats. He can't unmute, so he can't answer, at least with his voice. Maybe he'll type, but we can theorize as to why he wants to go from. I mean, the other tip is, and, you know, I think Jessica touched on this, is just, you know, think about the lifestyle change that as a tip, just your life will change drastically, you know, from going from freelance to permanent. You'll probably, you know, there's pros and cons. Obviously there's some financial security to some degree, although you can lose your job at any moment. And there's some health insurance eases of access. But your days won't be your own any day of the week, you know?
Right now, pivoting to permanent gig is not hard. There's such a crunch for hiring. There's so many open roles in agencies that you can get a job. It's just, where do you want to work and where do you want to do it? Where do you want to apply your creativity?
Yeah. And I would say freelance for this place, I was going to say agency, but it might not be an agency. But if you can, try to freelance first and see what that relationship looks like. You know, even before I went to Facebook, I freelanced technically for 3 months just to see. It's a big cultural shift, you know, to go to change your life like that. So,
yeah.
I had a question. So when I talk to young people about joining the industry. I always kind of pitch it as, getting to do, creative writing and drawing, all these things that we love, but you get to have health insurance, you get to have dental coverage and a 401k and all these things. But the people that I make a point of having those conversations with are typically, young people of color, people who don't look like me or don't look like our panel in this case. And I think that there is a generation of non-white creatives who would love to have the stability that we've enjoyed throughout our careers to this date. So when you talk about empowering an entirely new generation of people to be able to explore creativity with the stability that advertising can offer to them, how do you change your calculus for that kind of advice? Someone says, should I join this industry? But no one in my family has ever done anything creative, and I don't know anyone who's done that. How does that calculus change when we talk about enabling someone to actually do something creative without having to take on a massive, massive risk to themselves?
How old are these people generally?
High school,
yeah,
college.
I mean, for me, it was internships. I don't know if they're still a thing anymore, but at 19 and 20, I had internships, and I still remember the things I learned and the people who taught the things to me. And they weren't always at ad agencies. One was at a radio station and one was a record label. So I learned a ton. I'm wondering if young people in these communities could find whatever they're interested in, if it is creative, and find someone who's doing it and try to apprenticeships or everything. Even in comedy, so much of the comedy is what happens in the hang. The hang is everything. It's who you're hanging with afterwards, and what can you pick up from the comics who are just hanging at the table,
Yeah. It's, it is a culture of storytelling. And I think, so much of this industry, these stories been told by white men. And I think we're at a time now where as we, as the industry is inviting so many more people to the table, we're also inviting their stories. So I think now the job is to how do we get out of the way of the story we think is the answer, and invite a lot of these different stories to come together.
Yeah, I mean, and the comedy community suffers from the same thing. We were talking about this before. You don't want a lineup of all white straight dudes. It's not a good show for anybody. Nobody wants it, but yet we struggle, especially as you go to smaller and smaller towns, to find people of color who have the aptitude to do the show or the job, whatever it may be. But you also don't want to have people just on your lineup or on your team who are just there because of the color of their skin or because of their sexual orientation or because of their physical abilities. You want them to be there because of the merits of their work. And it's a systemic problem and a structural problem, because often the entryways into this industry, which were Miami Ad School or these ad schools, were predominantly white people. So where is the Black or Mexican or Guatemalan kid supposed to get access to these tools to learn this stuff? I don't have the answer to that, but I'm personally always trying to hire, whether it was in the ad agencies or whether it was on my comedy lineups, people who have a different point of view, which means they probably had a different background, but it is a lot of white dudes. Do you say that to Taras? I mean, is it predominantly, like, where are the portfolios coming from? Are they coming from, like, I don't know the color of someone's skin when I look at a portfolio.
I also think it's about, creating those internship, backgrounds, speaking at schools, finding different talent, inviting them to participate in, maybe it's a 24-hour kind of hackathon type thing of just like, hey, this is how a brief works. This is how we concept on ideas, and we hope to have something like this at the end of this. Let's see what we can do in a day. Yeah. We've done things like that, and it's a lot of fun, especially with like high school kids.
And sometimes it doesn't have to be part of a big program. Like, I mean, this kid that he's not a kid, he's a young man now, that I was mentoring, he does happen to be white, but he never went to college. He was a college dropout. He was delivering weed and pizza when I met him, and he was just way too intelligent to be doing that. I'm like, you should be making some real money. You have great, fantastic ideas. He's a comedian. That was just a one-on-one relationship. Chris seems to have a heart for bringing other people into this industry. You could just do it with one person. Just find one person. There's always some kid, you can see it in their face. If you ever guest teach or teach, you'll see there's one kid in the room whose eyes are really on. You're like, that person's engaged. That person's firing on all cylinders. And hopefully that person is someone who doesn't look like the other 99% of the people in the class. Take that person and mentor them. You can change their entire life, you know?
I mean, that all tracks. And that's why I stay very active with mentorship and those things. I wanted to kind of bring it to the thesis of this panel, though, is that does the question of whether advertising is worth it change if you don't have all the options that people of privilege, like ourselves, came into this with? Well, if you don't have the privilege of walking away from it because it's not fun anymore, it's not the way it was 10 years ago.
I was asked this before and I got dinged on this. I was asked, should there be more people of color in this business? I said, no, there should be people of no color in this business because I don't like the business. So it's hard for me to say, how do you then tell anybody, especially someone who's already lived in a marginalized community, to, hey, come in here and let's commodify your culture and sell it back to your brothers and sisters. But I would say one of the great reasons to do it is to get people from those communities to understand how the media works, make them understand the levers that manipulate popular opinion, and bring that to bear politically in their communities, because that can give you a lot of power.
Yeah, it's similar to politics that way, where it's like you understand how it works, and you can become part of it, so you can affect it.
Trojan horse it.
Yeah,
change it from the inside.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem.
Well, that said, I think we're gonna wrap up. It was really great having you guys here. I don't know what side I'm on right now, but
come be a comedian on the road. You'll make dozens of dollars.
I don't know that I'm very funny. People tell me that I am, but I think in the moment it's a bad idea unless I've had a lot of.
I'm doing it.
Any closing thoughts from you guys before we sign out?
I'm available for freelance. I'm kidding.
That's awesome. Look, I would just encourage people to be open. Just be open and follow what they're excited about making, and they'll find a place to make it now more than ever. It is a wonderful time to be creative, because you can be creative on your phone. And then you can also just be creative for companies and small agencies and big, different big social media platforms in ways that I was never able to do. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty exciting, but it takes some work. It takes some curiosity. And I just say, stay curious.
All right. Well, with that, just so everybody knows, we have several more creative events throughout the week. There's somebody talking about augmented reality and the metaverse, because that might be the world we're all going to live in one day. Caleb Davis is going to be on Thursday night, and he is somebody who created an online digital series for BET. He is a creative content director or some such of that nature in his regular life, and he did this on his own. And then there's also some things during the day, like if you're anything like me and you're creative, you don't know how to budget anything or create a work back schedule for your side project. So of course I brought on a producer to do that for us. And there's a lot of other people. Sunita is going to be talking. She's one of the founders of the Sideshow. So I definitely recommend talking to her. And on Thursday morning, if you need a little bit of yoga and embodiment and meditation to mesh with your creativity, we're also going to have something at 11 a.m. Eastern. So check out the Eventbrite for the Sideshow. You can see a lot of them listed there. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for talking to us.